The trip to Bear Lake had been Maya's idea, sold to me one night over a bottle of wine and a bunch of hand gestures that looked like she was mapping out a heist instead of a vacation. "We need this," she'd said. "Just a few days to breathe, no emails, no deadlines, no traffic." The plan was simple enough. Drive from our place in Montana, take the scenic route down through Wyoming, swing past the Utah line, then back up to Bear Lake for a long weekend in a rented A-frame cabin tucked deep in the pines. She'd invited Tara and Lindsay, two of her friends from work, and the understanding was that it would be a laid-back, no-pressure, recharge trip. By the time we crossed into Wyoming, the daylight was gone and the mood inside the car was this strange mix of tired and restless. The highway had been empty for miles. No gas stations, no fast food signs, just the hum of the tires and occasional bursts of laughter from the back seat when Tara or Lindsay showed Maya something on a phone. I was driving, nursing a headache from too much road glare and too little caffeine, when we finally saw a roadside store glowing up ahead like some kind of beacon in the dark. It was just past Evanston, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked. A sun-faded sign hung over two lonely gas pumps. Inside, a single flickering fluorescent light tried its best to fight off the dim corners. The smell hit me first: burnt coffee, motor oil, and something faintly sweet like old licorice. We filed in, everyone stretching and shaking the stiffness out of their legs. Tara and Lindsay made a beeline for the snack aisle, already debating whether they needed sour candy or beef jerky for the next stretch. Maya drifted toward the refrigerated drinks, calling over her shoulder about grabbing me a bottle of water. I headed for the counter with a styrofoam cup of coffee, more for the warmth than the taste. She'd left her tote bag in the cart at the end of the aisle, open at the top, stuffed with scarves, a paperback, a travel-sized bottle of hand lotion. I didn't think twice about it until I reached into my jacket for my wallet and my eyes fell on what was sitting right there in plain sight. Two plastic hotel keycards, glossy white with a blue stripe, each stamped in block letters with Cobalt Lodge, room 213. Took my brain a second to catch up. Next to them was a folded printout with a reservation confirmation. I could see the top line without even touching it. Guest, Maya Carter. Additional guest, Ryan Harper. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was that stomach drop feeling you get when the roller coaster takes the first plunge, where gravity itself seems to forget you exist. My eyes flicked from the paper to her phone, which was sitting face up on the counter next to the cart. The screen lit up just long enough for me to read the notification. Late check-in confirmed for your stay. I didn't pick up the paper. I didn't touch the keys. I didn't even breathe for a second. Every instinct told me that if I said the wrong thing now, in the middle of this tiny store, with her friends a few steps away, I'd never get a straight answer again. When she walked back over, I kept my voice even. "What's this?" I asked, nodding toward the keys. She didn't flinch, but there was the tiniest pause before she spoke. "Oh, that's for Tara and Lindsay," she said lightly, scooping the cards into her bag with a little laugh. "They've got a separate booking for a night with some friends. I just handled the reservation for them. It was easier to put it under my account." Her tone was breezy, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just logistics," she added, as if the word could erase the names I'd read or the message I'd seen. Before I could ask a follow-up, Tara and Lindsay appeared, arms full of snacks, still mid-conversation. Maya shifted smoothly into their topic, making some joke about road trip fuel, and just like that, the moment was gone, swallowed up by noise and motion. We paid for our things, and I followed them outside into the cold night air. I bent down to tie my boot, trying to buy myself a moment to think. When I stood back up, I saw the glow of the taillights already disappearing down the road. Took me a second to register that the car was gone. My car. My wife in the passenger seat, laughing at something one of them had said, speeding away without me. I stepped forward, half expecting them to swing back around in a U-turn, but the highway just swallowed them up. The wind cut through my jacket, and the distant hum of an 18-wheeler was the only sound for miles. I stood there for a long moment, coffee cooling in my hand, my breath clouding in the air. Part of me wanted to believe it was some kind of prank, a dumb road trip joke. But jokes don't leave you standing alone on the shoulder of an unfamiliar road. in another state with no idea how far it is to the next warm light. The gas station attendant stuck his head out the door. "You good, buddy?" he called. I forced a tight smile and waved him off. "Yeah," I lied. But as I looked down that empty stretch of asphalt, a sick heaviness settled in my chest. I had the sudden, unmistakable sense that whatever this trip had started out as, it wasn't going to end the way I'd been told. I started walking because there was nothing else to do. The shoulder thinned into a gray ribbon patched with frost and gravel, and the wind kept leaning on me like it had a grudge. Semis blew past in violent gusts, each one dragging a pocket of cold that tugged at my jacket and made the leftover coffee vibrate in my hand. I ditched the cup in a rusted barrel and kept moving, hands jammed under my arms, breath fogging up in quick, irritated bursts. I half-heartedly thumbed a couple of cars more for the ritual than the hope. Nobody stopped. That gave me time and time. Out here with the sky wide as a field and the stars hard as salt, brought memories up in a steady march. They didn't ask permission. They just arrived, each one a small, ordinary puzzle piece I'd brushed off at the time. Now they interlocked with a click I could feel in my teeth. Early on, we'd shared everything. Passwords, playlists, grocery lists, the dumb login for the thermostat that never remembered me. Then one summer, right when girls' nights with Tara and Lindsay went from occasional to calendar fixtures, her location just stopped appearing in our shared app battery stuff, she said, waving her phone. Apple changed something. A week later it was back. Another week and it was gone again. Each disappearance had a reason: Bluetooth interference, ad tracking, privacy settings, a ghost in the machine. Never the same explanation twice. Somehow that made it sound more convincing. The weekend work emergencies arrived like pop-up thunderstorms. Sudden, directional, gone by morning. She'd throw on jeans and that gray hoodie with the thumb holes, kiss me like a commercial, quick, upbeat, no tongue, and vanish to the office on a Saturday. I once offered to bring her dinner. She texted not to, said security got cranky after 6. Months later, a receptionist told me the building's lights turned off on motion timers and the doors unlocked with a tap. I remembered how, telling the story later, Maya had demonstrated the wave you make to wake up the sensors. So she'd been there, or she'd made sure I believed she had. Hotel charges under her maiden name started popping up like gophers on our joint account. Nothing huge, just one-night stays scattered in other zip codes. When I asked, she smiled. Wedding gifts. Tara's cousin elopes like it's a hobby. She even emailed a **T of a spreadsheet with confirmation numbers, dates, room types. I see now how easy it is to paste a grid full of plausible lies. The bracelets came around that same time. Not pricey. One braided leather, one thin silver cuff, and later a narrow black band with a clasp that clicked like a seatbelt. Market find, she said. Friend thing. She wore the leather one for errands, swapped to silver when she left for a quick coffee that might turn into a meeting. The black band showed up the days she went to the gym. I told myself I wasn't the kind of husband who policed jewelry. I told myself a lot of things. Her phone developed new habits, too. It used to live on the counter, speaker on, her teasing me about how my podcasts made everyone sound like they were yelling through a tin can. Then it started living face down. Calls ended when I entered a room. The bathroom door began to lock during showers. Music up loud enough to drown the drip and whatever else. If I asked, she said, work never sleeps. If I didn't ask, work apparently got louder. One spring, a bright orange key tag appeared on her key ring. A gym I'd never heard of. Company discount, she said. Wellness program. She started leaving after dinner for spin. Then came home aglow, hair damp but makeup set in a way that didn't match a room full of stationary bikes. The first time I asked how class was, she said, good, and kissed me quick. The 10th time, she said, why are we doing exit interviews for sweat? Tara and Lindsay gradually shifted from friends to human shields. Their jokes narrowed to knives with confetti taped on. When I burned pancakes, Tara christened me Chef Charcoal. When Maya borrowed my charger, Lindsay said, he's just happy to be useful. Everyone laughed, but Maya's laugh had an edge to it. loud and bright like a car alarm pretending to be a party horn. I told myself I was being sensitive. It's amazing how long you can gaslight yourself when the alternative is reshaping your entire life. There were smells. Not new perfume. She kept the same green bottle scent, but cologne ghosting the seatbelt. Something crisp and clean with a mint bite that lingered in the throat. There were receipts I found folded into the corners of her tote. A cafe across town we both disliked. A florist we'd never used. A hardware store near a neighborhood we had no reason to visit. Helping Tara with a surprise, she said. Tara's the kind who would throw a surprise party for her mailman. To fit. That was the problem. Everything fit until it didn't. And then there were the stories themselves. Maya used to come home overflowing with detail. The weird guy in the elevator who collected vintage lunchboxes, the office spider plant that survived on spite, the client with a name that sounded like a breakfast cereal. Lately her days shrank. Fine, she'd say, scrolling. Yours. If I offered mine, she'd nod at the right beats, thumbs moving. I told myself we were both tired. Maybe we were. Maybe only one of us was tired of me. I stepped over a shredded bungee cord and nudged a rock off the asphalt, listening to it skitter until the sound quit. My phone buzzed once, then again. I didn't look. I could guess the script. Laughing emojis. Relax. We thought you were right behind us. A dropped pin that landed in the median. Later she'd call it a joke that got away from them. I'd nod, because nodding uses fewer calories than starting a fight you're not ready to finish. Thanksgiving flashed up next. The last one at her parents' place, when she disappeared after pie to take a quick call. I walked past the den and saw her turned toward the window, voice low, whispering, "I'll send it in 10. Stop worrying." She hung up the second she saw me, kissed my cheek, and said it was her boss, deadline, nightmare, the usual. In the kitchen her dad asked me about football and her mother asked if we were still planning to try for kids next summer after the cabin. I remember saying maybe and feeling like I'd told a lie I didn't know how to retract. There was also a name that started showing up in her mouth the way a song lyric gets stuck in your head. Ryan. The absence of him was first years of never hearing him. Then suddenly he was everywhere. Ryan says the data tells a story. Ryan's training for a marathon on, like, avocado toast. Ryan's not like the other guys. He doesn't play politics. I joked once, lightly, about him scheduling all those late meetings. Don't be weird, she said. And I laughed, good soldier style, deciding I could live with weird if it kept the peace. I thought of the time she forgot her Apple Watch and borrowed mine for a week. How my step count *T up on nights she said she was buried in spreadsheets. I thought of the free gym towel I found under the passenger seat with initials that weren't a logo but looked like someone's stitched monogram. I thought of the tiny half-moon of a bruise at the base of her neck she blamed on a curling iron, even though she hadn't curled her hair in months. One clue is a question. 100 clues are an answer you're afraid to read. A low wind pushed me sideways and I caught myself on a mile marker post, green paint flaking under my palm. I did a quick inventory of what I'd left in the car. Charger, a blue knit hat, a half-uneaten bag of pretzel bites. Then I did another inventory, the kind you can't pack, my trust, the benefit of the doubt I'd been handing out like samples at a warehouse store. The small, generous stories I'd told about us to keep the big, ugly story from stepping into the light. Every remembered detail slid into place like teeth on a zipper. The keys at the store, the printed reservation with 2 names, the late check-in, those weren't accidents. They were the moment the camera pulls back and you realize you've been staring at a corner of the picture. Not the whole thing. I used to think relationships broke with a crash you could point to. Out here, with the cold chewing my ears and the highway unspooling like tape, I understood ours had been wearing thin for a long time, frayed by soft excuses and carefully folded lies. Headlights rolled toward me from behind. I stuck my thumb out again, this time meaning it. A pickup eased onto the shoulder, hazards blinking a steady amber heartbeat. The window slid down and a man in a weathered cap leaned across the bench seat. "You stuck?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. "Logan," he offered, as if reading my geography. "I'm headed that way." "Me too." My voice cracked on the second word, the way a rope sounds when it takes weight. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. "Maya, don't be dramatic. We thought you were right behind us. 3 dots appeared, thinking, composing, selecting which version of the truth to sell. I powered the phone down and slid it into my pocket. I climbed in and shut the door. Warmth climbed into my sleeves from the truck's vents, carrying coffee and diesel and a hint of pine. We merged back onto the highway, the shoulder disappearing in the mirror until it was just darkness swallowing darkness. For the first time all night, the memories stopped arguing. They lined up, quiet and orderly, all their competing interpretations stamped and filed. What I'd seen at the gas station wasn't an error. It wasn't a mix-up or a friend favor misread by a tired husband. It was the truth, finally bold enough to stand under the fluorescent light, tapping the glass, asking if I was ready to sign for delivery. The man who picked me up was a long-haul driver named Rick. His truck's cab smelled like strong coffee and diesel, the heat cranked high enough to thaw the chill that had settled into my bones. He didn't ask many questions, just listened as I told him the short version. Left behind at a gas station by people who were supposed to be my ride. "That's cold," he said, shaking his head. "Logan's on my route. You can ride up front." We rolled through the dark, the highway a steady ribbon under the headlights. My phone stayed off. I didn't want to see whatever string of justifications or half-jokes might be waiting. The silence was better. By the time we reached Logan, it was past midnight. Rick dropped me outside a low brick building that doubled as the sheriff's office. I walked in with nothing but my wallet and the conviction that whatever this was, it wasn't just a prank. I told the deputy on duty the truth. My wife and her friends had driven off, leaving me on the shoulder of a highway in another state with no transportation, no coat fit for the cold, and no reasonable way to get back. He took notes, asked if I wanted to press charges for reckless endangerment or abandonment. I told him I wanted it on record first, then I'd decide. He gave me a list of local motels, but all I could think about was the name printed on that folded reservation, Cobalt Lodge. I still had the room number. I still had the image of the keycards burned into my head. There was a payphone in the corner. I fed in quarters and dialed the number from the search results. When the lodge's night clerk answered, I kept my voice even. "I'm calling about a reservation. Room 213. Names under Maya Carter." A pause, then the clack of keys. "Checked in late tonight," he said. "2 guests. Do you keep entry logs for the keycards?" "Yes, sir. Each use is time-stamped." I swallowed. "Tell me the last 2 entries." "Both at 1:03 a.m., he said after another pause. 2 cards used within seconds. "We've also got lobby footage. Want me to describe them?" I didn't need him to, but I let him talk. A woman in a dark coat, hair pulled back, carrying a tote bag. A tall man in a hooded sweatshirt. They came in together, laughing. When I hung up, the room around me felt oddly quiet, as if the air had decided it had heard enough. There it was, confirmation. No excuses, no logistics cover story. I stayed in a budget motel that night, 1 room over from a heater that banged like it was throwing a tantrum. In the morning, I found a courier service, handed over a handwritten packet of claims, and gave them 3 addresses. Maya's work, Tara's condo, Lindsay's apartment. The papers inside were straightforward. Itemized costs for the belongings and documents I'd lost, the price of an emergency hotel and cab, the fee for canceling our cabin booking, and, because I wanted the truth on the record, compensation for emotional distress from being stranded. Each envelope carried the line, "This constitutes formal notice of pending civil action." Then I called a local attorney whose ad claimed rapid filing for urgent matters. He listened without interrupting, then said, "We can start today. I'll need the lodge's statement in writing." The clerk was cooperative. By noon, a signed statement and a digital copy of the timestamp logs sat in my inbox. My attorney filed them with the initial complaint. By the time the sun had burned the frost off the truck roofs outside, the summonses were already in motion. A process server would hand them over before Maya and her friends even finished their lakeside coffee. I imagined them walking back to the cabin, stamping snow off their boots, only to be met with a stranger holding an envelope addressed in legal formality. I pictured the flicker of confusion, the defensive smile starting to crack, The moment when the weight of paperwork hit harder than any accusation I could make in person. I didn't gloat. The point wasn't revenge, it was control. For the first time since I saw those keycards in her bag, I was the one setting the terms. By early afternoon, I was sitting in a booth at a diner, a fresh cup of coffee steaming in front of me. I'd replaced my hat and gloves from a thrift store down the block. The truck stop cold still lingered in my fingers, but it was fading. Across the street, the attorney's office window reflected the slow, steady snowfall. Inside my coat pocket, the lodge's statement felt heavier than its paper weight. A physical anchor to the truth I could hold, present, file, and never let her explain away. I knew this was just the opening round. Civil claims have a way of spilling into other arenas: property division, divorce filings, custody battles if kids are involved. But that was later. Right now, I had proof, a paper trail, and a clear record that I hadn't simply walked away muttering. When my phone finally buzzed, I turned it over, read the first line of her message, and powered it off again. I didn't need to hear her voice bending the facts into some palatable shape. The paperwork was already walking toward her, one envelope at a time, in the hands of a man paid to put it exactly where it couldn't be ignored. I didn't sleep much the night after the filings went out. The motel bed was lumpy, the heater groaned every half hour, and my mind ran in loops. What they were saying about me right now, what version of the story they were feeding anyone who'd listen. It didn't matter. The summonses were already in their hands. That was the truth's first anchor. The next morning, I walked into a small church off Main Street. A cardboard sign out front read, "Night shelter open. All welcome." Inside, a volunteer with gray hair and steady eyes asked if I needed a bed for the night. I told her I was fine for now, but I'd take the coffee she offered. The room smelled of cinnamon rolls and old hymnals. For a few hours, I sat at a folding table, warm and anonymous, listening to the quiet rhythm of people helping each other without expecting anything in return. That evening, I came back. The volunteer pointed me toward a cot near the back, handed me a blanket and said, "Rest. Worry about tomorrow." Tomorrow, as it turned out, started with the sound of a snowplow outside. I got up early, helped stack chairs, and asked if they knew of any work. Someone pointed me toward a roadside assistance company on the edge of town. Night dispatcher needed, no experience necessary. By that afternoon, I was sitting in a cramped office beside a wall of radios, listening to a man named Carl explain how to log calls, track tow trucks, and deal with drivers who called you kid, no matter how many gray hairs you had. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady was oxygen right then. Night dispatch turned into more than a job. I learned which drivers liked the mountain runs, which cursed the icy passes, and which could change a tire blindfolded but couldn't file a report to save their lives. I started staying after shifts, watching the mechanics in the garage. Before long, I was out there with them, swapping brake pads, patching tires, learning how to read the subtle sounds of an engine in trouble. 6 months in, I bought a used tow truck off a guy who was retiring to Arizona. Faded paint, cracked upholstery, but the winch ran smooth and the engine still had bite. I filed the paperwork for milepost rescue. Just me, one truck, and the promise that if someone called, I'd get there. The studio apartment I rented sat above a laundromat, the smell of detergent drifting in through the floorboards. It was small enough that I could make coffee and change the channel without standing up, but it was mine. No hidden hotel receipts, no locked phones, no sudden disappearances. Maya tried to call once, then twice. Then she sent a letter with handwriting I knew too well. I didn't open it. My attorney's address was printed at the bottom of every page in my claims packet. If she had something to say, she could route it there. Work kept me busy enough that weeks blurred. Winter eased into spring, and the calls shifted from dead batteries in the cold to overheated engines on the long grades. I found I liked the solitude of the cab, the way a job gave you a beginning, middle, and end in the span of a few hours. Someone stranded, a problem solved, a handshake or a nod, and then the road stretching out again. By the end of the first year, I'd paid off the truck and saved enough to start looking for a second one. I hired a part-time driver, Eddie, who'd been working the garage and could outdrive anyone on a snowed-in mountain road. Milepost rescue went from some guy with a truck to those guys who'll actually show up at 3 in the morning. It was on one of those 3 a.m. calls that I met Zoe. She was a paramedic with the local EMS, hair pulled into a braid, eyes steady in the flashing red and blue. I was hooking up a minivan that had spun into a snowbank when she walked over, thanked me for clearing the scene fast so they could get the driver warmed up, and handed me a card. "In case you ever need medical backup," she said with a grin. Over the next few months, we kept running into each other. Accidents, breakdowns, the occasional community safety fair where I'd park the truck for kids to climb in. We started swapping texts about call volumes and weather, then about books, then about nothing in particular. When the second milepost truck hit the road, Zoe came by the shop with a six-pack and a cake from the bakery near her station. By the third truck, she was spending her days off in the garage with me, passing tools, asking questions about winch cables and lug nut patterns. It didn't happen all at once, but one day I realized her toothbrush was in my bathroom and her jacket hung by the door. We found a small house outside town with a 4-bay garage and a yard big enough for both the trucks and the dog she'd been talking about adopting. The business grew. I started training new hires, showing them how to read a roadside scene before they stepped out of the cab, how to keep calm when a driver's panic started spilling over. We signed contracts with 2 insurance companies for direct dispatch, which meant fewer slow nights and more predictable pay. Sometimes, usually late, I'd think about Bear Lake, about that gas station glow and the keys in her bag. The anger had dulled into something like background static there, but no longer dictating the signal. The court case had moved slowly but predictably, and every communication from Maya went through legal channels. She never saw my address again. Zoe never asked for details beyond what I offered. She knew there'd been a betrayal, a collapse, a rebuilding. She also knew that milepost rescue had started with one man walking away from an empty highway, and she respected the stubbornness it took to make something out of that. By our second year together, the garage held 4 trucks, a workbench I'd built from salvaged oak, and a wall covered in thank you notes from people we'd pulled out of ditches, jump-started in blizzards, or rescued when their GPS sent them up roads better suited to goats. The studio over the laundromat was long gone. So was the version of me who would have sat at a kitchen table, phone in hand, waiting for an explanation that would never match the facts. In its place was this: a business that paid the bills and then some, a home that felt earned, and a partner whose absence I never had to explain. I didn't call it happiness exactly, but it was close enough that I stopped measuring the distance. By the time we'd been in the house for a year, the place had *N to look less like a repair yard and more like a home. The 4-bay garage was still the heart of it. Concrete floor patched where old drains had been, steel shelves lined with oil filters and straps, the air always faintly smelling of brake cleaner. But there was a kitchen with warm light in the mornings and a living room where the coffee table wasn't a flat surface for paperwork anymore. Zoe fit into that life without trying. She still worked her shifts with EMS, 12 or 24 hours at a stretch, but on days off she'd roll up the garage doors and help me prep the trucks, checking tire pressure, restocking emergency blankets, making sure the winch remotes had fresh batteries. She had a way of moving through the space like she belonged there, which I guess she did. Milepost rescue kept growing. The insurance contracts brought in more calls than I could take myself, even with Eddie covering nights. We bought a 3rd truck, a used flatbed that had been sitting in a county lot after the previous owner retired, and put it on the road with a driver named Luis, a soft-spoken guy who could back into a blind alley without tapping a mirror. With 3 trucks running, I had to learn how to stop thinking like a driver and start thinking like an owner. Dispatch schedules, maintenance logs, payroll, it wasn't glamorous, but it kept the wheels turning. I hired a part-time bookkeeper to keep the numbers straight and free up my time for training. Zoe was part of that training whether she meant to be or not. She had a knack for reading people, for calming them down when adrenaline was still spiking. I'd watch her at accident scenes, crouching so she was eye level with someone who'd just been spun into a ditch, talking them through every step like the world wasn't falling apart around them. I started building some of her approach into our onboarding, reminding new hires that half the job was mechanical, the other half human. We started taking short trips together whenever our schedules allowed. 3 days here, for there. A cabin in the Bitterroots, a motel near Glacier where the sunrise turned the whole sky into copper, A rented RV, we drove to Oregon just to see the coast in winter. Sometimes we'd take one of the smaller trucks, just in case work called. Sometimes we didn't tell anyone where we were going. The business hit its first real stress test in the second winter. A blizzard came down off the mountains, snarling the main highway and freezing half the county. All 3 trucks were out for 30 hours straight, pulling semis off embankments, boosting dead batteries in parking lots, hauling cars that had spun into snowbanks high enough to hide them. Zoe ran dispatch from the kitchen table while I bounced between jobs, Eddie and Luis calling in their locations on the hour. When it was over, the 3 of us sat in the garage with coffee that tasted like exhaustion and victory. Zoe leaned against my shoulder, and for the first time, I let myself think. This isn't just survival anymore. This is building. We made it official in quiet ways before we did it on paper. Shared accounts for household stuff. Her name on the insurance for the trucks. My toothbrush in the holder next to hers when I stayed at her place during a particularly bad flu season for her crew. Then one day she handed me a folder with listings for houses. Not bigger, just better laid out. "We need a real office," she said, "and a proper lift in the garage." The place we found was on the edge of town, far enough for quiet but close enough for a fast run to the interstate. For bays again, but taller ceilings for the lift, a workshop with a parts washer, and a separate office with a desk big enough for maps, call logs, and the ancient radio I still kept as backup. Moving was easier than I thought it would be. The trucks came first, parked in their new spots like they'd been there forever. Then the workbench, tool chests, shelving. The house part of it was smaller than before, but we liked it that way, less to clean, more reason to spend time outside. That summer, I hired 2 more drivers. Milepost went to 2 shifts, 24/7 coverage. I stopped taking every call myself and started managing from the office more, though I still grabbed a truck whenever I could. The newer hires were good, quick learners, steady under pressure, but I made sure they understood the history. This started with 1 truck, I'd tell them, because somebody got left on the side of the road. We don't leave people behind. Zoe handled her own growth too. She'd been tapped to oversee clinical training for the EMS department, which meant fewer street calls but more time teaching. She liked it, even if she missed the rush sometimes. We'd compare notes over dinner about managing people, how to correct without discouraging, how to make sure the new ones understood the responsibility that came with the job. We saved without really meaning to. Neither of us were big spenders, and the work paid well enough that after a couple of years we had a cushion. We replaced the oldest truck with a custom build, low-profile bed, winch capacity to handle heavier loads, extra compartments for roadside gear. The day it arrived, painted in mileposts deep blue with the silver lettering sharp and clean, felt like a milestone. Looking back, I realized Zoe had been there for every major step in the rebuild of my life. Not as a rescuer. She never tried to fix what had happened before her, but as a partner who stood next to me while I figured it out myself. That mattered more than I knew how to say. I kept the legal file from the Maya days in a locked drawer in the office. It wasn't bitterness, it was record-keeping. Proof of where I'd been, in case the past ever tried to rewrite itself. Zoe knew it was there, never asked to read it. We started talking about the future in terms that didn't feel like tempting fate. Maybe another truck. Maybe training other operators in nearby towns. Maybe a week away without bringing the work phone. On the rare nights when the phones stayed quiet and the trucks were all parked, we'd sit in the driveway with the garage doors open, watching the sun drop behind the ridges. The air would smell of grease and pine, and I'd think about the man on the highway that night. Cold, alone, watching his wife drive away. I'd tell him he'd make it here, to this driveway, with these trucks and this partner who knew what it meant to stand her ground. But I wouldn't tell him how. Some roads you just have to take yourself.